people for coming today. I appreciate the press being here, and I certainly appreciate the crowd that we have. Tonight, my name is Michael McPhearson. I'm the National Coordinator for United for Peace and Justice and the former Executive Director of Veterans for Peace. I'm also a member of Military Families Speak Out because my son served a tour in Iraq. Today is the 10-year anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. That means tomorrow will be day one of the 11th year that the United States will be engaged in war. 10 long years that we have been engaged in war, dropping bombs, killing people, spending trillions of dollars. Now, I'm not going to go into a lot about that because we have people here that can talk about Afghanistan and what we're doing, and also people who will speak also on Iraq. I want to talk about briefly why we decided to come here to Dr. King's memorial. In 9 days, the United States will dedicate this memorial to Dr. King. The reason that's happening is because Dr. King was a great leader that changed the fabric of this country. If Dr. King were here today, because he was a modest man, I'm not sure that he would be real happy that we have a memorial, but that's how modest people are. The question would be, what would he think about what we're doing in the world today? In 1967, Dr. King gave a great, powerful speech at Riverside Church on April 4th, a year to the date before he was killed. It was called Beyond Vietnam, Breaking the Silence. And I suggest that if you haven't read that speech, that you do so, because it would give you great insight into what Dr. King would think of our behavior in the world. The reason that we're here is because we're going to dedicate soon this memorial, but at the same time, we are ignoring what Dr. King told us. And very briefly, I want to speak to that. One thing he called us in that speech was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. That's because we were at war. Today we are at war, and we are certainly dropping more bombs on people across the world than any other nation. We have more troops deployed around the world than any other nation. So we continue to be the greatest purveyor of war in the world. Our #1 export is weapons. He also said that a country that spends more on war than social uplift is approaching spiritual death. We have nearly $1 trillion budget on war, our Pentagon, plus the money that we spend actually on the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we spend a fraction of that on social uplift. As a consequence of all that spending, we find ourselves in a financial crisis, and we also find ourselves in great debt. It's one thing to be in great debt when you're trying to help people and lift them up. But it's quite another when you're in great debt because you are in the process of killing people. And the last thing, and this is not all he talked about in the speech, but the last thing I'm going to talk about, because I want to get to the speakers, is that Dr. King asked us to challenge the triplet evils of poverty, of racism, and militarism. If you take that and translate that in today, racism is hate. You can't have racism without hate. You cannot have wars without hate. You cannot kill innocent children and civilians. And remember, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people have died that had nothing against the United States. They were not combatants. They are dead from our bombs and bullets. You cannot do that without hate. As far as poverty, you won't have poverty if people work together and people aren't greedy. We find ourselves in this financial crisis, which has led to this economic crisis because of greed. And finally, militarism. And I'm a veteran, I was a soldier, and I appreciate our country honoring us and honoring the dead. But we should not be thought of as sacred. We should not be lifted up above the citizens. And certainly, with all the money that we spend on war and in our Pentagon, it's like a sacred cow. You cannot touch that money. But we're cutting human services and human needs left and right. That is militarism at its worst. Those are the reasons we find ourselves in the situation we're in. We are not listening to Dr. King's words, and we just wanted to draw that parallel. That's why we're here today.